All right, so let's dive into a really interesting guy, a really interesting period in American history with Zachary Taylor.
Hmm.
And we've got a great episode of American history here to kind of guide us through this. And
Yeah.
they really do paint a vivid picture of Taylor and his times, Don Wildman and the historian Cecily Zander.
Yeah.
So think back to 1848,
Okay.
a time when, Europe is in the throes of revolution,
Right.
but America is expanding westward. It's in this context that we meet Zachary Taylor.
Right.
Now, this guy is a Southern slave owner who opposed the expansion of slavery,
Wow.
a career military man who didn't vote until he was a civilian, and the last president to bring enslaved people to the White House.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Talk about a bundle of contradictions.
He really is like the embodiment of all of the conflicts and tensions of that era, isn't he?
Yeah, where do we even begin to unravel this complex figure?
Well, maybe we can look back to his early life and see if that gives us any clues.
Yeah, so he was born into a slaveholding family in Virginia before moving to Kentucky. His father was a veteran of the Revolutionary War and received land grants in Kentucky for his service.
Yeah, and it's really important to note that, he inherited more than just land. He inherited a whole system
Right,
that was built on slavery.
right.
And his upbringing, in that environment definitely shaped his worldview, and he became a slave owner himself,
Yeah.
purchased multiple plantations throughout his life.
Wow, that's a chilling reminder of just how entrenched slavery was
Right.
at that era.
Yeah.
But here's where the twist comes in that Wildman and Zander highlight.
Yeah.
He opposed expanding slavery into the new territories gained during the Mexican-American War.
Right.
Now, that seems pretty paradoxical for a Southern slaveholder, doesn't it?
It really does. It's so intriguing. And there's a couple of reasons for this. He was actually very pragmatic
Yeah.
and concerned that, the arid western lands weren't really suitable for large-scale cotton and tobacco plantations,
Right.
which was, the economic engine of slavery at the time.
Of course.
And he also worried that, pushing slavery further would actually provoke the South to secede, which, as a staunch Unionist, he couldn't abide.
So he was thinking about the long-term stability of the Union,
Yes.
the economic realities,
Yeah.
not just the moral arguments.
It seems so.
Yeah.
And his military career probably played a really significant role in shaping these views as well.
Yeah.
If we think back, he fought in the War of 1812, battled Native American forces on the frontier,
Wow.
led troops in the Second Seminole War in Florida.
Right.
So he actually experienced firsthand the challenges of, maintaining national unity.
Right.
And he saw the potential consequences of division.
It seems like those experiences on the battlefield
Yeah.
had a profound impact on him. Wildman actually mentions that he wasn't the most brilliant military strategist.
Yeah.
He even got his initial commission through family connections. But his persistence and presence on the front lines,
Yeah.
alongside his men, earned him the nickname Old Rough and Ready.
Exactly. He wasn't, a polished general or anything.
Right.
He was known for his simple uniform,
Yeah.
his unassuming demeanor.
Right.
He was more at home on the battlefield than, in some fancy salon.
Right.
But he was a fighter.
Yeah.
And in Florida, he employed some brutal tactics,
Okay.
using bloodhounds to track Seminoles, which was a tactic that slaveholders
Oh, wow.
also used to recapture escaped slaves.
That's a jarring detail, isn't it?
It is.
It kind of adds another layer to this complex picture of Taylor.
Right.
It's hard to reconcile those actions with the image of a leader who opposed the expansion of slavery.
Yeah, history is rarely, neat and tidy.
Of course.
And Taylor's life is full of these contradictions,
Right.
these moral complexities that challenge our understanding of the past.
Right.
But it's those contradictions that make him so fascinating.
So true. And speaking of contradictions, how does a career soldier who barely even participated in politics
Right.
end up as president?
Well, it was partly due to the Mexican-American War. Okay.
Which Wildman and Zander describe as a really pivotal moment
Right.
in Taylor's life and in American history as a whole.
The Mexican-American War, this is where Old Rough and Ready becomes a national hero.
Exactly.
So President Polk, eager to expand westward, sends Taylor into Texas,
Right.
a newly independent republic that the U.S. was keen on annexing.
Yeah, and Polk's actions were quite calculated.
Yeah.
He intentionally provoked a war with Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And his aim was not just to secure Texas, but also to claim New Mexico and Arizona with California as the ultimate prize.
So it was a land grab disguised as a border dispute.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And Taylor delivered securing victories at Palo Alto, Resaca de la Palma, Monterey, and most famously, Buena Vista.
Yes.
Now, Buena Vista is particularly interesting.
It is.
He was outnumbered by thousands.
Wow.
But Taylor used a clever, albeit brutal tactic, ordering Braxton Bragg to unleash a little more grape, which was canister shot filled with musket balls.
Right. Which decimated the Mexican ranks and cemented Taylor's reputation as a tenacious leader.
Absolutely. And, I remember seeing that iconic campaign poster from 1848.
Oh, yeah.
That depicted Taylor's victories.
Yeah.
With each letter of his name showcasing a famous battle.
Right.
It seems like a playful image now, but it really highlights the growing influence of media in American politics even back then.
Yeah.
Taylor's military victories were plastered across newspapers.
Yeah.
Feeding this public that was eager for these stories of American triumph.
Yeah.
And the media, in its very early form, was already shaping perceptions and creating national heroes.
So Taylor, the reluctant politician with no prior political experience, finds himself catapulted to the national stage.
Yeah.
Largely due to his military fame.
Yeah.
And the media's portrayal of him.
Yeah, and the Whig Party was desperate for a unifying figure in a really divided nation.
Right.
So they seized on Taylor's popularity.
Yeah.
And his apolitical stance became his greatest asset, presenting him as this, man above the partisan squabbles.
But that lack of political experience would come back to haunt him, wouldn't it?
Right.
Especially when he had to deal with the ever-present issue of slavery.
Oh, absolutely.
How could a slave owner, even one opposed to expansion, navigate this political minefield of the slavery debate?
Right. Well, that's where the story takes another fascinating turn. It seems like he was walking this real tightrope, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to balance his Southern roots and his own slave ownership with, this commitment to the Union and his opposition to expanding slavery.
It's a powerful image. And it makes his opposition to the expansion of slavery even more intriguing.
It does.
I mean, was he truly against it on moral grounds, or was it more about pragmatism and just preserving the Union?
It seems to have been a little bit of both.
Yeah.
He believed that the Western territories were not suitable for, the kind of large-scale plantation agriculture that thrived in the South. He even argued that the expansion of slavery would actually weaken Southern political power in the long run.
Okay.
But there's also evidence, as Wildman points out, that Taylor was genuinely concerned about the moral implications of slavery. He reportedly said that, while he inherited enslaved people, he would never buy or sell another human being.
So he recognized the inhumanity of it?
Yeah.
Even if he couldn't completely break free from the system he was born into?
Right. It's a complex issue, and it speaks to the nuanced reality of that era.
Right.
And it's those nuances that make Taylor's story so compelling.
Yeah.
He wasn't, a simple figure that we can just neatly categorize as good or bad.
Right.
He was a man grappling with these really difficult questions, trying to find his way in this world that was on the brink of profound change.
But while he may have recognized the moral complexities of slavery, he still owned slaves.
Right.
So how do you reconcile that with his opposition to expansion?
That is a question that continues to puzzle historians to this day. Some argue that, Taylor was a product of his time, that his views on slavery were evolving,
Right.
that he might have ultimately, come to support abolition if he had lived longer.
Right.
Others contend that, his opposition to expansion was driven primarily by political and economic calculations,
Right.
not moral conviction.
So there's really no easy answer.
No.
Yeah, it's a reminder that historical figures, even presidents,
Yeah.
were real people with flaws and contradictions.
They were.
They weren't perfect heroes or villains.
Precisely. And trying to understand, Taylor's views on slavery requires us to really grapple with the messy reality of the past,
Right.
to acknowledge, the complexities and the ambiguities that defy simple explanations.
Well said. And, those complexities, they extend beyond the issue of slavery.
Of course.
His military background, his lack of political experience,
Yeah.
his sudden rise to fame and the presidency, all of these factors shaped his approach to leadership
Right.
and his ability to navigate the political landscape.
You're absolutely right. And Wildman and Zander do a great job of highlighting how Taylor's military experience influenced his political style. He was a man of action, used to giving orders and expecting results.
Yeah.
He valued decisiveness and directness, which are qualities that don't always translate well to the world of diplomacy and compromise. That is politics.
Yeah, I imagine that, leading troops in battle
Yeah.
is quite different from negotiating with senators and,
totally different.
Drafting legislation.
Yeah, it's a different kind of battlefield.
Yeah. So even though he was a national hero and a popular figure, his lack of political savvy may have actually hindered his effectiveness as president.
It seems so, Wildman points out that Taylor's blunt style and his unwillingness to compromise really alienated some members of Congress.
Right.
And his insistence on popular sovereignty as the solution to the slavery issue,
Yeah.
while it seemed democratic at the time,
Right.
letting each state decide proved to be a deeply flawed approach.
So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
I remember you mentioned popular sovereignty earlier.
Yeah.
I'm still not entirely clear on, how it worked and why it ultimately backfired.
Sure. So popular sovereignty, in the context of the slavery debate,
Right.
meant allowing the residents of each new territory to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery.
Okay.
It seemed like, a fair solution at the time,
Right.
putting the decision in the hands of the people directly.
Yeah, it sounds democratic on the surface.
It does.
But I have a feeling there's more to it than that.
There is. The problem was that it opened the door to, a lot of manipulation, violence, and ultimately further division.
Oh, wow.
Pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces rushed into these territories,
Yeah.
trying to influence the vote, and they often resorted to intimidation and, even bloodshed.
Wow, that sounds chaotic and dangerous.
It was.
Mhm.
And the most well-known example of this is Bleeding Kansas,
Right.
where, these pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions clashed violently, turning the territory into a battleground.
It became a microcosm of the national struggle over slavery.
Exactly. And it foreshadowed the Civil War that would erupt just a few years later.
So popular sovereignty, far from being a peaceful solution, actually exacerbated tensions
It
and
did.
contributed to the escalation of violence.
Yeah, and it's a cautionary tale about the limits of democracy, especially when applied to issues as divisive and emotionally charged as slavery.
It's fascinating how this seemingly simple solution, letting the people decide,
I know.
ended up having such profound and ultimately tragic consequences.
It's a reminder that even, well-intentioned policies can have unintended consequences.
Right.
Especially when they fail to address the underlying social and political dynamics at play.
Well, it seems like Taylor, despite his military successes and his popularity, was facing some pretty formidable challenges as president.
He was.
He was grappling with a deeply divided nation,
Yeah.
a complex issue with no easy answers,
Right.
and a political system he didn't fully understand.
Exactly. And it's in this context that, his sudden death takes on even greater significance.
Right. His presidency was tragically cut short after just 16 months.
It was.
He attended a 4th of July celebration in the sweltering heat of Washington, D.C.,
Right.
consumed a large quantity of cherries and iced milk,
Oh, wow.
and soon after fell violently ill.
Yeah.
And 5 days later, he was dead.
The official cause of death was gastroenteritis,
Okay.
likely a cholera-like illness,
Right.
rampant in 19th century cities with poor sanitation.
Right.
There were some whispers of poisoning,
Yeah.
but those have largely been dismissed by historians.
It's a reminder of how different life was back then.
It is.
Something as simple as contaminated food or water
Yeah.
could have fatal consequences.
Absolutely.
Right.
And Taylor's sudden death left the nation reeling.
Yeah.
And it adds another layer of intrigue to his story.
Right.
It raises all sorts of questions about what might have been.
Yeah, what if he had served a full term? Would he have been able to navigate this increasingly volatile political landscape?
Right.
Could he have prevented or at least delayed the Civil War?
Those are questions that historians continue to debate to this day.
Yeah.
And Wildman and Zander don't shy away from tackling these what-ifs.
Okay, I'm eager to hear their insights on that.
Yeah.
But before we get into the hypothetical scenarios, let's delve a little bit deeper into the reality of Taylor's presidency.
Okay.
What were some of the key issues that he faced beyond the slavery debate?
Well, one of the major challenges that he confronted was the issue of westward expansion itself.
Yeah.
Remember, the Mexican-American War had just ended,
Right.
and the United States had acquired all of this vast new territory.
So it wasn't just about, whether to allow slavery in these new lands,
Right.
but also about how to govern them,
Right.
how to integrate them into the existing nation.
Exactly. And Taylor, with his military background and his experience on the frontier,
Yeah.
he had some strong opinions on how to manage westward expansion.
I'm curious to hear what his approach was. Was he in favor of rapid settlement and development, or did he advocate for a more cautious approach?
He favored a balanced approach, one that recognized both the opportunities and the challenges of westward expansion.
Okay.
He understood the economic potential of these new territories,
Yeah.
but he also recognized the need to respect the rights of Native American tribes and to protect the environment.
So he wasn't simply a proponent of manifest destiny, this
But
idea that the United States was destined to expand across the continent.
no, he was more nuanced than that.
Okay.
He believed in westward expansion, but he also believed in doing it responsibly,
Okay.
with a sense of justice and fairness.
That's an interesting perspective.
Mhm.
It seems like he was trying to reconcile the nation's expansionist impulses
Right.
with a more pragmatic and perhaps even ethical approach to westward development.
Yeah, and that really reflects a larger theme that runs through his presidency.
Okay.
This tension between idealism and pragmatism, between the grand vision of, America's destiny and the messy realities of governing this diverse and often divided nation.
That's a tension that we still grapple with today.
We do.
This idea of how to balance our aspirations with the complexities of the real world.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why, studying Taylor's presidency is so relevant.
Right.
It offers insights into, the challenges of leadership, the dilemmas of democracy, this enduring quest to, forge a more perfect union.
Well said.
Yeah.
And speaking of forging a more perfect union,
Right.
let's circle back to the issue that dominated Taylor's presidency
Right.
and ultimately set the stage for the Civil War slavery.
Of course. You're right. It's impossible to understand Taylor's legacy without grappling with the complexities of the slavery debate and his role in trying to navigate that really treacherous terrain.
And one of the most intriguing aspects of that story is Taylor's relationship with his son-in-law, Jefferson Davis.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, talk about a family connection that adds another layer of complexity to this whole narrative.
It's almost unbelievable, isn't it?
It is.
The President of the United States,
Yeah.
a staunch Unionist with a son-in-law who would become the President of the Confederacy.
Yeah, it's like something out of a Shakespearean play.
It is.
Full of drama and irony and ultimately tragedy.
It really is. And
Yeah.
it adds this personal dimension to, the political drama that's unfolding on the national stage.
Yeah.
Imagine the conversations they must have had, the tensions that must have existed within that family
Right.
as the nation edged closer and closer to civil war.
I can only imagine it must have been incredibly difficult for Taylor
Right.
trying to hold together his family
Yeah.
and his nation as both were being torn apart by the same issue.
It's a poignant reminder that history is made by real people with real families and real relationships.
Right.
And those personal connections often influence, the course of events in ways we can't fully comprehend.
That's a powerful insight. And it makes me wonder how Taylor's relationship with Davis might have shaped his approach to this slavery issue.
Yeah.
Did it soften his stance towards the South,
Mm.
or did it strengthen his resolve to preserve the Union?
It's a question worth pondering. And while we can't know for sure, what Taylor's motivations were,
Right.
we can explore the evidence and the historical context to try and gain a deeper understanding of this complex relationship and its potential impact on his presidency.
Let's do that. What can you tell us about Taylor and Davis's relationship? How did they come to be connected, and how did that relationship evolve over time?
Well, it all began with a whirlwind romance between Taylor's eldest daughter, Sarah Knox Taylor, and a young lieutenant named Jefferson Davis.
Oh, so it was a love story, at least at the beginning.
It was, but it was a love story that would be overshadowed by tragedy and political turmoil.
I'm sensing a dramatic turn of events. What happened?
Well, Sarah Knox Taylor and Jefferson Davis, they fell deeply in love and eloped against Taylor's wishes.
He didn't approve.
He did not. He disapproved of the match, partly because Davis was a military man with a less than stellar reputation,
Okay.
and partly because Taylor was a Whig and Davis was a Democrat.
So there were political and personal reasons for his disapproval.
There were.
And how did Davis react to his father-in-law's opposition?
He was understandably not thrilled about it,
Yeah.
and it definitely caused a strain in their relationship,
Right.
a strain that would be further exacerbated by the issue of slavery.
So even before the national crisis over slavery reached its peak,
Yeah,
there were already tensions simmering within Taylor's own family.
that's right. And those personal tensions would eventually be amplified by the larger political and social forces that were tearing the nation apart.
It's a reminder that even the most powerful figures in history are not immune to the complexities of family dynamics
Right.
and, the personal stakes involved in these political conflicts.
They're not. And in Taylor's case, those personal stakes were incredibly high.
Right.
He was not only the president of the United States, but he was also a father.
A father-in-law, a man trying to navigate the treacherous waters of a nation on the brink of civil war.
And to make matters even more complicated,
Yeah.
his son-in-law was destined to become one of the key figures in that conflict.
I know. It's a fascinating and tragic twist of fate.
It is, and it's a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events.
Yeah.
It's a story of human lives, relationships, and the choices we make in the face of extraordinary challenges.
Well said. And as we continue our deep dive into Zachary Taylor's life and presidency, let's keep those human stories in mind.
Right.
Those personal connections that shaped his decisions and ultimately contributed to his legacy.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that tension, knowing what we know now about how history unfolded.
Right.
Taylor committed to the Union, and his daughter married to the future president of the Confederacy.
Yeah.
Did their relationship ever improve, or did the issue of slavery just drive a permanent wedge between them?
Well, sadly, their reconciliation was short-lived.
Sarah Knox Taylor contracted malaria just a few months after her marriage.
Oh, wow.
And died tragically.
Oh, that's awful.
It was a devastating loss for Taylor.
Yeah.
And a real blow to his relationship with Davis.
Yeah.
They never quite recovered from that shared grief, and the political divisions between them just deepened as the slavery crisis escalated.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It has another layer of tragedy to Taylor's life.
Yeah.
To think that this personal loss played out against the backdrop of a nation teetering on the brink of civil war.
It's a stark reminder that, history is not just about these grand events and political battles.
Right.
It's also about the personal stories, the human dramas that unfold within those larger narratives.
Of course.
And in Taylor's case, those personal stories are intertwined with the fate of the nation in a way that's both fascinating and deeply moving.
So as we reflect on Taylor's life and legacy,
we
see this man marked by contradictions and complexities.
We do.
A slave owner who opposed the expansion of slavery.
Right.
A military hero who struggled with the intricacies of politics.
Yeah.
And a father who lost his daughter in this tragic twist of fate.
And all of this playing out against the backdrop of, one of the most tumultuous periods in American history.
Right.
It's no wonder that historians continue to debate his motivations, his accomplishments, and his ultimate impact on the course of events.
So where does that leave us? What are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive into Zachary Taylor's life and presidency?
Well, I think one of the key insights is that Taylor was very much a man of his time.
Okay.
Deeply influenced by the prevailing beliefs and social structures of the antebellum South.
Right.
Yet, he also wrestled with those beliefs and ultimately challenged the very institution that defined his world.
He seems to have been a man caught between two worlds, struggling to reconcile his personal beliefs with the political realities of his era.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's that struggle, that inner conflict that makes him such a fascinating and enigmatic figure. He wasn't, a simple hero or a villain.
Yeah.
He was a complex human being.
Right.
Grappling with these difficult choices.
Right.
Trying to do what he believed was right for his family, his region, and his nation.
And those choices, as we've seen, had far-reaching consequences.
They did.
His decision to oppose the expansion of slavery, his commitment to the Union, his advocacy for popular sovereignty. These were all actions that really shaped the course of history and contributed to the growing tensions that would ultimately erupt into civil war.
Absolutely. And while we can't know for sure what would have happened if Taylor had lived longer, if he had served a full term, we can speculate that his strong stance against disunion might have altered the trajectory of the nation.
It's a tantalizing thought, isn't it?
It is.
That one person, one leader, could have potentially changed the course of history.
Right.
But it also underscores the fragility of peace.
Yeah.
And the profound impact that individual choices can have on the fate of nations.
Absolutely. It does. And, it's a reminder that history is not just a story of the past. It's also a story about the present and the future.
Right.
The choices we make today, the leaders we choose,
Right.
the values we uphold, these all have the potential to shape the world we live in.
Of course.
And the world that we leave for future generations.
That's a powerful message to end on.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and presidency of Zachary Taylor, let's remember that history is not just a collection of facts and dates.
Right.
It's a story of human lives, complexities, and the enduring quest to build a more just and equitable society.
And it's a story that continues to resonate today, reminding us that the choices we make individually and collectively
Right.
have the power to shape the course of history
Yeah.
and create a better future for all.